Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales for the paranormal, supernatural, and flat out unbelievable. Today I'll be sharing ghost stories from Ohio. Let's get into it. Story 1. I was 7 years old and just about to go into the first grade. We had just moved and I knew no one. When I was younger, I was obsessed with dolls. For my 6th birthday, my grandma had gifted me a doll she had found at Goodwill. This doll was old. They no longer make dolls like her anymore, and I was thrilled. I would be the only one with this doll, and I already loved her. I named her Jamie, and I took her everywhere. I started noticing weird things about 3 months after I received Jamie. When I would be playing with her, I would hear the voices of people that weren't there. As a young child, I mostly ignored the voices and continued playing. These occurrences stopped for a couple of months and came back in full force about a month after my 7th birthday. I met a girl named Leah, changed her name for privacy reasons, and invited her over to play. We had an extra room at that time because my mom was pregnant with my would-be second little brother. The room was set up as a nursery and was perfect for a playing house. Both Leah and I agreed that Jamie would be the oldest child, and a few of my younger dolls would be Jamie's younger siblings. Leah thought it would be fun to put Jamie in timeout for hitting her sister. I agreed. We set Jamie in the crib facing the wall, grabbed both the other dolls, left the room, and closed the door behind us. We waited for a few minutes and re-entered the room. Jamie was now sitting in the exact same place, but facing the door. Both Leah and I fled, leaving Jamie where she was, refusing to re-enter the room. At that year's garage sale, we sold the doll to an antique owner, who promised to take good care of her. It still haunts me to this day, and I will never truly understand how it happened. The only other people in the house that day were my dad and my younger brother, who were in the basement when it happened. We were standing outside the door, so no one could have entered the room. Story 2. This took place in the mid-80s, when I was 11 or 12. My mom was an art teacher back then, and my best friend's mom was an artist, so there were a lot of artsy things floating around our two households. Cracked pottery, sculptures, fancy drapes, costume jewelry, you name it. But the one that took the cake was a real human skull that my friend's mom used for a sketching model. How she came to own it was unclear to me. I do know that it wasn't a deceased family member. The first incident took place on an extremely cold evening in January. My friend invited several of us over to her place to hang out. The reason I mentioned the cold is because she had dark thermal drapes in her room. The drapes kept out the chill, but they also blocked out streetlights, headlights, and whatever natural light was left that day. We decided not to turn on the inside lights and lit a couple of candles instead. After playing a few rounds of cards, one of us had the bright idea that we should try summon spirits. We had no idea what we were doing, but we wanted to make it a glamorous affair by decorating my friend's dresser with offerings. The dresser had a huge trifold mirror on top. We draped some sparkly necklaces and scarves around the mirror, put some jewelry boxes in front of it, set the candles in front of the mirror, spread out a deck of cards, and, you guessed it, placed the skull in the middle of this arrangement. Then we huddled on my friend's bed and waited. None of us knew how to summon spirits, so we just sat there waiting for something to happen. I had some misgivings about using the skull, but went along with the scheme thinking that it was harmless enough. Since I was a little scared, I didn't look at the dresser, but focused my attention on the dark corner shielded from all the light by a huge old-fashioned wardrobe. The corner was very dark. Suddenly a faint circular light appeared there, started to grow. Strangely enough, it did not scare me. I just sat there and watched it get bigger. It felt like a long time, but I doubt that this lasted longer than a few seconds. Suddenly the bedroom door flew open, and my friend's 3-year-old brother burst into the room, banging pot lids together and offering to fry us an egg. The light from the hallway poured into the dark bedroom, and the faint circle of light disappeared. I asked my friends later if any of them saw anything. They said they didn't, but they were looking at the dresser and the mirror. I was the only one who was too scared to look at the centerpiece. I tried to convince myself afterwards that what I saw was perfectly natural. Perhaps it was a ray of light that proceeded The opening of the bedroom door, I argued. Unfortunately, no explanation seemed completely adequate. Light from the door would have started as a linear streak, not a circle. Maybe darkness messed with my vision, but then again, perhaps we were all saved from the massive scare, or worse, by a 30-year-old chef. The following fall, my mom borrowed the skull for sketching. For a few weeks it sat in the middle of our fancy dining room table, the kind that only gets used at Christmas. As I didn't have to see the skull at night, I wasn't particularly scared of it, but generally preferred to steer clear. Several weeks into the skull's temporary residency, my mom called me into the dining room and asked me to bring a duffel bag. She seemed very concerned about something. When I arrived with the bag, she loaded the skull into the bag, told me not to touch the skull, and asked me to take it back to my friend's house as soon as possible. I was really spooked at that point and ran rather quickly to my friend's place. When I got back, my mom breathed a sigh of relief and told me that she thought the skull had really bad energy. A few weeks later, she explained that after she brought the skull home, all kinds of little things started going wrong. Nothing really serious, just annoying little things. She didn't elaborate, but said that as soon as the skull left, everything went back to normal. Story 3. When I was in my early teens, I used to spend a few weeks each summer at my grandma's farmhouse out in the country. The house was very old, complete with a root cellar under the kitchen and a rickety staircase. The front part of the house was bright and airy and happy, but the back part was gloomy and creepy. We mostly used the back for storage and rarely went there. The house didn't generally have bad vibes, but I felt like the heavy front part of the house was besieged by darkness lingering in the back and in the creepy root cellar underneath. I was never 100% comfortable there. One time my grandma was out grocery shopping or visiting a friend, and I was left alone in the house. There weren't many kids my age in this tiny town, and I mostly had to fend for myself for entertainment. TV reception was terrible. This was back in the 80s, so I spent most of my time walking, reading, and doing crafts. To break the monotony, I thought it would be a fun experiment with a Ouija board. I didn't have one on hand, and since I was alone, I didn't think it would work anyway. Then I recalled that a friend once told me that instead of a Ouija, I could use a needle suspended over the alphabet drawn around a circle. The needle would supposedly move and point to letters in response to questions. It didn't sound very legit, but I was bored and decided to try it. I drew letters around a circle and suspended a needle on a thread over it. The needle settled, pointing to the center of the circle. Thank you, gravity. It did not move again, but I wasn't going to give up that easily. I figured that if I rested the point of the needle in the center and tilted the needle a little by lowering its top, I could get the top to spin around while the tip remained anchored in the center. Then the top was bound to settle, pointing to a letter. This time I had the laws of physics on my side, so the needle did indeed point to different letters each time I gave it a whirl. I'm sure I started with some silly questions about which boys liked me, and I'm sure I got some gibberish answers. It wasn't really working. I was ready to give up, but decided to ask what my profession will be when I grow up. The needle finally spelled the word, shoe. This freaked me out. I ran out of the house and sat in the yard until my grandma returned. Once back from summer break, I told my friends about what had happened. We had a good laugh about me becoming a shoe. Several years went by and I'd forgotten about the incident entirely. It all came back though when I found myself working in the shoe department at a large store. Story 4. It took me over 40 years to write this account with a calm and analytical frame of mind. Initially, every time my husband and I tried to write about it, we'd get rattled and discontinue it. We wanted to send this account to a well-known parapsychologist, Hans Holzer, to add to his files, but we never got around to it. I assume if you're reading this that you're a believer, so here goes. One of the most powerful experiences happened in my mid to late 20s, shortly after my divorce from Bob, my first husband. I met John as a blind date, and amazingly, we immediately clicked. He fell for me at first sight. It was a second marriage for both of us, and it took us a few months to get adjusted to each other. But we were so very much alike it was spooky, pardon the pun. He was living in a house on Erie Road, not too far from downtown Willoughby, Ohio. This particular house I was familiar with since I was a kid. The neighborhood kids and I used to ride our bicycles past that house on Erie Road in the summer months. Every time I looked at that house, I got the crawling scalp. I could just sense something wrong about it. My gaze was unusually drawn to the third floor upstairs window that I later discovered was an attic. I felt something up there to be looking back at me and letting me know, yes, I'm here, just keep riding on. I instinctively knew the house was haunted, not just because it was a decrepit, run-down dwelling over 100 years old, but because I just felt it. Many years later, I never imagined that I'd actually be living there with my second husband and his mother, Mary. Mary was divorced from Tom, her second husband, and needed somewhere to live. John and his sister, Jean, invited her to live with them. John and Jean are the ones who originally found the house and rented the upstairs portion. It was an old farmhouse that was converted into an up and downstairs apartments. However, when John and I got together, Jean had married and moved out. Mary was a wonderful mother-in-law, and on top of that, she was incredibly psychic. John was psychic, and I, likewise, was slightly psychic. Now, you get 3 psychic individuals in a haunted environment with an electrical power substation in a wooded area, not even 80 yards behind the house, and you're looking at paranormal disaster, as we later would find out. It started out innocent enough, with very little drawing our attention. We just shrugged those little things off. However, the more we settled into a home life routine, the more things began to get noticed. Incidents like apparitions, that is to say, solid objects disappearing into thin air and turning up in the most unlikely places. When you put a coffee pot on a stove, leave the room for a few seconds, go back, the pot is gone and cannot be found anywhere. A day later, said coffee pot turns up in the refrigerator. Give me a break. All sorts of items were going missing to be found hours or days later. We'd hear our names called with no one there, being touched with no one nearby, hearing sounds that cannot be accounted for, going away for a few hours and coming home to the kitchen floor having 2 inches of ice-cold water on it. No water was left running, there was no rain, and the roof didn't leak. We began to doubt our sanity until we realized that the house was, in fact, haunted. Mary, being Catholic, sprinkled holy water around, but it may as well have been chocolate syrup. In fact, things escalated to a fever pitch. Outbreaks of millions of baby spiders swarming all over the ceiling of John and my bedroom. Later, there was an outbreak of millions, no exaggerations, of millipedes, little wireworms crawling all over the inside and outside of the house, even spilling out into the front yard. Super nightmare. Another time I was alone in the living room, seated on the couch with the dog, Bumpy, at my feet, reading a book. Suddenly she rose, stared at the ceiling, began a low growling with all the hackles on her back raised, and trembling against my legs. From the far end of the house, directly over the kitchen, I heard up in the attic heavy footsteps. It sounded like a very large man with work boots on walking from that end to the living room right over my head. I even heard the boots squeal as they did a 180 and marched slowly back over the kitchen area. That was too much. I tore out of the living room, down the hall, through the kitchen, and into the imagined safety of the bathroom with the poor dog hot on my heels. Her and I just waited in the bathroom for John to come back home. We burst out of the bathroom and I excitedly told him what had transpired. He grabbed a bat and went up to the attic stairs. I followed him. Of course, there was no human intruder found. I knew that there wouldn't be either. In the attic directly behind the railing at the top of the stairs was a tremendous cold cubicle. It was about 5 feet wide and 8 feet deep. In the summer months, the temperature up there rose to almost 120 degrees. Yet in that one area behind the railing, it was like a meat locker. You could stick your arm in and feel the ice cold and see your breath. We deduced that the thing was concentrated in that area for the most part. However, it still had the ability to make us miserable. It began to affect our moods in the most negative ways. We'd fight for the most inconsequential things, leave the house, and then wonder why we fought in the first place. It even drove John to drinking and charging up the steps to the attic to do battle with it. I managed to sober him up, calm him down, and rationalize with him. We made the decision to sell whatever we could to earn extra money in addition to our work paychecks and get out. If something doesn't want you there, you cannot reason with it. Just get out. When we found a nice mobile home in West Park, Cleveland, we loaded up the car with all our belongings and 2 dogs and left so fast that we left a vapor trail behind us. We never looked back. It took us the better part of a year living in the trailer, adjusting to relative normalcy, to stop jumping at our own shadows. This is no Amityville horror. This really happened. No one would live in the house too long after we left, and it was sold to a preacher that turned it into a church. Eesh. I hope the religious influence has made a dramatic difference, but we wouldn't even drive by that place anymore. To those of you that are skeptics, no amount of convincing will sway you. However, to those of you that are dealing with it or have dealt with something like this, I'm sure you more than understand. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.